A millionairess humiliates a homeless woman, but years later, an unexpected meeting between them uncovers a long-hidden secret, revealing a shocking truth. The biting cold of the early morning in New York City jolted Sarah awake from her restless sleep. She huddled deeper into her worn-out coat, her only shield against the frigid concrete of the alley where she had spent the night. With a heavy sigh, Sarah got up, her bones protesting the movement. Her green eyes, once vibrant, now bore the weight of years on the streets. "Today will be different," she murmured to herself, trying to inject some hope into her hoarse voice. Sarah knew the financial district would be her best bet. Rushed executives, expensive coffees in hand, maybe one of them would have a heart soft enough to give her a few coins. On the top floor of a luxurious building, Evelyn Ashworth was finishing getting ready, her frantic movements betraying her irritation. "You're never around, Evelyn." Her husband's words echoed in her mind. She adjusted her pristine blazer, ignoring the pang of guilt. "I have a company to run," she replied to her reflection in the mirror, rehearsing the coldness she would later use. With one last look at the empty room, Evelyn grabbed her Italian leather briefcase and left, the sound of her heels echoing through the silent mansion. Sarah walked through the streets downtown, her stomach growling in protest. She approached a man in a suit. "Excuse me, sir, do you have any spare change?" The man ignored her completely, quickening his pace. Sarah swallowed hard, the familiar yet no less painful rejection hitting her. She tried again with a woman talking on her phone. "Please, ma'am, any help?" But the woman waved her off impatiently and walked away. With each refusal, Sarah felt her resolve waver. Desperation began to set in, weighing heavily on her chest. Evelyn entered her company's building like a whirlwind, ignoring the nervous greetings of her employees. "Gentlemen, I apologize for the delay," she said, entering the conference room where executives were waiting anxiously. "Can we begin?" she asked, her voice sharp. As she listened to the financial report, Evelyn felt her irritation grow. The numbers weren't good, and she knew she'd have to make some tough decisions. The pressure of maintaining her empire was crushing, and she could feel a headache forming. Sarah saw Evelyn leaving the corporate building, her posture exuding power and confidence. Something about that woman made her hesitate, but hunger spoke louder. Summoning all her courage, Sarah approached. "Excuse me, ma'am," Sarah began, her voice trembling slightly. "I know you must be busy, but could you help me with some change for food?" Evelyn stopped, her eyes meeting Sarah's. For a moment there was a spark of recognition, as if both felt an inexplicable connection. But the moment passed quickly. Evelyn's expression hardened, years of frustration and stress spilling over in a single moment of cruelty. "Help!" she hissed, her voice dripping with disdain. "Why should I help someone who doesn't help themselves?" Evelyn's words cut through the air like knives. "You're nothing but a parasite leeching off society. Why don't you get a real job instead of begging?" The crowd around them stopped, watching the scene with a mix of shock and morbid curiosity. Sarah felt each word like a physical blow, her legs trembling under the weight of humiliation. I just... Sarah tried to speak, but the words died in her throat. "You just what?" Evelyn continued, her anger fueled by her own shame that she felt but didn't recognize. "Do you think the world owes you something? Grow up and take responsibility for your life." With a final look of disdain, Evelyn walked away, leaving Sarah trembling and exposed under the curious and judging eyes of passers-by. Evelyn's words echoed in Sarah's mind as she wandered aimlessly through the streets of New York. The sun began to set, painting the sky in orange hues that she barely noticed. Each step was an effort, as if she were carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Parasite. Useless. Get a real job. The words repeated like a cruel mantra, eroding what little self-esteem Sarah still had. She saw her reflection in the window of a closed store. Her eyes were empty, her face gaunt and pale. Could she be right? Sarah wondered, feeling the tears she had held back for so long start to fall. The city's buzz around her seemed distant, as if Sarah were isolated in a bubble of despair. She walked aimlessly, her legs carrying her automatically, while her mind spun in a whirlwind of doubt and self-loathing. When she finally stopped, Sarah found herself at the edge of a bridge. The dark waters below seemed to call her, offering a tempting escape from her pain. For a moment, she considered it. It would be so easy to end it all. But something inside her, a stubborn spark of hope, held her back. Sarah stepped away from the edge, trembling. She didn't know what the future held, but that night, she decided that somehow, she would find the strength to carry on. With one last look at the turbulent waters, Sarah turned and walked back to the city streets, determined to survive another day, unaware that fate had much bigger plans for her. Sarah leaned over the railing of the bridge, her eyes fixed on the dark waters of the Hudson River below. The cold night wind whipped against her face, but she barely felt it. Evelyn's cruel words still echoed in her mind, mixing with all the other voices that had belittled her over the years. Maybe they're right, Sarah murmured to herself, her hands trembling as they gripped the cold metal. Maybe I really am a burden to everyone. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of years of struggle and rejection. For a moment, Sarah allowed herself to imagine the relief that would come with the end of it all. It would be so easy. Luisa Ferreira hurried across the bridge, returning from a long day at the New Dawn Rehabilitation Center. Her tired eyes noticed Sarah's solitary figure, and something about her posture made Luisa stop abruptly. "Hey!" Luisa called out, her voice gentle but firm. "Is everything okay?" Sarah turned, surprised by the interruption. Her eyes met Luisa's, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Luisa approached slowly, her hands extended in a gesture of peace. "My name is Luisa. Can I talk to you for a minute?" "I don't need help," Sarah murmured, but her voice betrayed her exhaustion. Luisa smiled softly. "How about we just talk a bit? I know a place nearby where we can get a warm coffee. No pressure, I promise." Something in Luisa's sincerity made Sarah hesitate. After a long moment, she nodded almost imperceptibly. As they walked, Luisa talked about the New Dawn Rehabilitation Center. "It's a place where people going through tough times can find a new beginning," she explained. Sarah listened in silence, a small spark of curiosity lighting up her tired eyes. The rehabilitation center was a renovated old warehouse, its exterior walls covered by a colorful mural of hope. Sarah entered hesitantly, immediately enveloped by the warmth and the smell of fresh coffee. Luisa guided her down a hallway, showing her the classrooms and workshops. "We have training programs for various fields, including healthcare," she explained. "Many people have found a new purpose here." Sarah stopped in front of a bulletin board, her eyes fixed on a poster about the nursing assistant training program. I've always wanted to help people," she whispered, almost to herself. Luisa smiled, recognizing the spark of interest in Sarah's eyes. "Would you like to know more about this program?" Sarah found herself sitting in a small meeting room, a cup of hot coffee between her trembling hands. Luisa was explaining the details of the training program, but Sarah found herself lost in thought. "I don't know if I can do this," Sarah interrupted suddenly. I have nothing. No place to live, no decent clothes." Luisa leaned forward, her eyes kind but determined. "Sarah, this program is designed for people just like you. We offer temporary housing, clothes, everything you need to start fresh. All we ask for is your commitment." Sarah was silent for a long moment, her emotions in turmoil. Fear, hope, doubt, all mingled in her chest. "What if I fail?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. Luisa smiled, reaching out to gently touch Sarah's arm. "Then you'll try again. We're here to support you, Sarah. Every step of the way." Sarah looked down at the enrollment form in front of her. Her hands still trembled, but now for a different reason. Fear, yes, but also possibility. With a deep breath, Sarah picked up the pen. "Okay," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I want to try." As Sarah filled out the form, Luisa watched with a quiet smile. She had seen that spark before, in so many other eyes. It was the first step of a difficult but transformative journey. "Welcome to New Dawn, Sarah," Louisa said when Sarah finished signing. "Tomorrow we start your new chapter." Sarah nodded, feeling a mix of fear and anticipation. As she followed Louisa to see the temporary housing, she couldn't help but think about how much her life had changed in just a few hours. The road ahead would be tough, Sarah knew that, but for the first time in a long while she felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. The alarm clock rang at 5:30 a.m., and Sarah opened her eyes, momentarily disoriented. The small but clean room in the New Dawn Rehabilitation Center was a stark contrast to the alleys where she used to sleep. She got up feeling the weight of anxiety in her stomach. It was her first day of training. Sarah looked at the uniform folded over the chair, a white shirt and blue pants. Her hands trembled slightly as she got dressed. "You can do this," she murmured to herself, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes, once so dull, now had a faint glimmer of hope. In the classroom, Sarah sat in the back row trying to become invisible. The instructor, a middle-aged nurse with a kind smile, began the lesson. The words seemed like an incomprehensible whirlwind to Sarah. Anatomy, physiology, medical procedures. It was as if she was hearing a foreign language. During the break, Sarah was about to isolate herself when she felt a hand on her shoulder. "Hey, you look a little lost. Can I help?" It was a young woman with curly hair and an easy smile. "I'm Mariana." Sarah hesitated, years of distrust battling against the need for connection. "Sarah," she finally replied. "And yes, I'm completely lost." Mariana laughed. "Don't worry. Everyone feels that way at the beginning. How about we study together after class?" That afternoon, sitting in the center's library, Mariana patiently explained the concepts Sarah had missed. For the first time in years, Sarah felt the warmth of friendship budding. Weeks passed, and Sarah began to get the hang of the course. However, on one particularly tough morning, the weight of her past hit her like a wave. Sitting in the center's bathroom, Sarah sobbed quietly, overwhelmed by self-doubt. "Who am I kidding?" she thought. "A former homeless woman will never become a respected healthcare professional." Her fingers itched with the familiar urge for a drug, an escape. For a terrible moment, Sarah considered giving it all up. That afternoon, Dr. Ricardo Mendez, head of the emergency department at St. Luke's Hospital, came to give a lecture to the students. Sarah, still shaken from the morning, sat in the back of the room, half absent. Dr. Ricardo began to speak, his calm and steady voice filling the auditorium. "Many of you are probably wondering if you're in the right place," he said, his eyes scanning the room. "I grew up in a neighborhood not too far from here. There were days when I didn't know if I would have anything to eat, let alone dream of becoming a doctor." Sarah lifted her head, suddenly interested. Dr. Ricardo continued, "But each of you is here for a reason. You have a strength that you might not even realize you possess. The journey will be tough, but I promise you, it's worth it." His words touched something deep in Sarah. She felt the tears return to her eyes, but this time, they were of renewed determination. The months passed in a whirlwind of studies, practice, and challenges. Sarah faced each obstacle with fierce determination, fueled by Dr. Ricardo's words and the constant support of Mariana and Louisa. Finally, the day of graduation arrived. Sarah stood before the mirror, adjusting her graduation uniform. She barely recognized the woman looking back at her, confident, strong, accomplished. Sarah Oliveira, called the center's director. With steady steps, Sarah walked up to the stage to receive her certificate. The audience applauded, but for Sarah the loudest sound was her own heart, beating with pride and gratitude. As she stepped off the stage, her eyes met Louisa's, who was smiling with tears in her eyes. Mariana hugged her tightly, whispering, "You did it." Dr. Ricardo, who had been invited as the commencement speaker, approached Sarah after the ceremony. "Congratulations," he said, shaking her hand. "I've heard impressive things about you. Would you consider a position at St. Luke's Hospital?" Sarah was speechless for a moment, overwhelmed by emotion. "It would be an honor, Doctor," she finally replied, her voice trembling with emotion. That night, alone in her room, Sarah looked at the certificate in her hands. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the nights on the streets, the despair, the humiliation. But she also thought about Luisa's kindness, Mariana's friendship, and Dr. Ricardo's inspiration. Sarah knew the road ahead would still be challenging, but now she had something she thought she had lost forever: a future. With a smile, she placed the certificate on the nightstand and lay down, dreaming of the patients she would soon be able to help. Sarah's journey of transformation was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. But now she was ready to face whatever came her way, one day at a time. Sarah's heart raced as she walked through the glass doors of St. Luke's Hospital. The entrance hall was imposing, with its gleaming marble floors and impeccably dressed receptionists. Sarah adjusted the badge on her new uniform, trying to ignore the feeling that she didn't belong there. "Sarah Oliveira," a voice called out. It was the head nurse, a middle-aged woman with a stern look. "Welcome to St. Luke's. Let's start your tour." As she followed the head nurse through the corridors, Sarah took in every detail. The state-of-the-art equipment, the luxurious rooms. Everything was so different from anything she had ever known. The reality of her new life hit her with full force. "Your shift starts at 7 p.m., the head nurse informed her. "Don't be late." Sarah nodded, determined not to disappoint. This was her chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. The first few weeks were a trial by fire. Sarah gave it her all, but she could feel the skeptical looks from some of her colleagues. One day she overheard two nurses whispering in the break room. "Did you hear? She came from that rehab program," one of them said. Can you imagine a former homeless woman taking care of patients? Sarah felt her face burn with shame and anger. She wanted to shout, to defend herself, but the words got stuck in her throat. Instead, she left quietly, vowing to prove her worth through her actions. The opportunity came on a hectic night in the emergency room. An elderly patient, Mr. Jose, was causing problems, refusing to take his medication and yelling at the staff. "He won't let anyone near him," a frustrated nurse explained. Sarah took a deep breath and approached Mr. Jose's bed. "Good evening, Mr. Jose. May I talk with you for a bit?" The man looked at her suspiciously, but something in Sarah's calm voice made him pause. "You must be scared," Sarah continued. "I understand. I spent a lot of time being scared too." Slowly, Sarah began to earn Mr. Jose's trust. She listened to his stories, his worries, and gently explained the importance of the treatment. By the end of the night, not only had Mr. Jose taken his medication, but he also thanked Sarah with tears in his eyes. "Impressive work with Mr. Jose." Dr. Ricardo's voice surprised Sarah in the hallway. "Not everyone can calm our most difficult patients." Sarah blushed at the compliment. "Thank you, doctor. I just tried to put myself in his shoes." Dr. Ricardo smiled. "That's exactly what makes an excellent healthcare professional, Sarah. Your empathy is a valuable gift." Dr. Ricardo's words echoed in Sarah's mind for the rest of her shift. For the first time, she felt like she truly belonged there. Months passed and Sarah settled into a routine. Her nights were filled with patient care, and her days with continuous studies to improve her skills. Gradually, she gained the respect of her colleagues and the trust of the patients. One night, after a particularly tough shift, Sarah found herself in the hospital chapel. She wasn't religious, but the silence of the place drew her in. Sitting on a wooden pew, Sarah reflected on her journey. She remembered the cold nights on the streets, the despair that had pushed her to the brink of suicide. She thought of Luisa, who had extended a hand when she needed it most. Of Mariana, whose friendship had sustained her through the tough times of training. Of Dr. Ricardo, who had seen potential in her when she couldn't even see it in herself. Silent tears streamed down Sarah's face. But for the first time in a long time, they were tears of gratitude and accomplishment. "Hey!" A gentle voice pulled her out of her thoughts. It was Mariana, who had also gotten a job at the same hospital. "Are you okay?" Sarah smiled through her tears. "Yes, I'm okay. I'm just giving thanks." Mariana sat down next to her, taking her hand. "You deserve all of this, Sarah. You worked hard to get here." "Sometimes it's still hard to believe," Sarah confessed. "There are days I wake up thinking this is all just a dream." "It's not a dream," Mariana squeezed her hand. "You built this reality, and you're going to keep building amazing things." The two friends sat there in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Sarah felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. She knew there were still challenges ahead, but now she had the confidence to face them. As she left the chapel, Sarah looked up at the night sky over New York. The city lights shone brightly, reflecting the hope now burning in her heart. She smiled, ready for the next shift, the next challenge, the next chapter of her life. Sarah couldn't imagine that her biggest challenge was just about to arrive, in the form of a face from the past that would change everything once again. The day started with a rush at the headquarters of Ashworth Enterprises. Evelyn Ashworth, impeccable in her gray suit, was presiding over a tense meeting with the board of directors. The numbers from the last quarter were not encouraging, and the pressure to turn things around was palpable. "Gentlemen, we need solutions, not excuses," Evelyn declared, her voice sharp. "I want an action plan on my desk by the end of the day." As the executives hurried out, Evelyn felt a familiar pang in her chest. She ignored it, as she always did. There was work to be done, and she didn't have time for weakness. As the afternoon wore on, Evelyn's chest pain intensified. Her assistant, noticing her paleness, suggested calling a doctor, but Evelyn irritably refused. "I have an important video conference in 5 minutes," she said, swallowing another painkiller. "Don't interrupt me unless it's absolutely necessary." Evelyn started the call, determined to close a crucial deal. But in the middle of her presentation, the pain exploded. Her vision darkened, and she heard distant screams before everything went silent. The doors of St. Luke's Hospital emergency room burst open violently. Paramedics were rushing in with a stretcher, shouting information. Female, 48 years old, possible heart attack, blood pressure dropping. Sarah, who was on duty that night, ran to help. Her heart froze when she saw the patient's face. It was her, the woman who had humiliated her years ago. For a moment, Sarah hesitated. All the emotions from that terrible day came flooding back. But her training and professional ethics prevailed. "Dr. Camilla," Sarah called out, "I need help here." The following hours were a whirlwind of activity. Evelyn was rushed into surgery while Sarah assisted the medical team, providing information and post-operative care. When she finally had a moment to breathe, Sarah retreated to the break room, trembling. Mariana, noticing her state, approached with concern. "Sarah, what happened? You're as white as a sheet." Sarah hesitated, but the words spilled out. "That patient, she was the person who humiliated me years ago, before I came here." Mariana hugged her friend. "Oh, Sarah, that must have been horrible for you. The worst part is," and Sarah whispered, "part of me didn't want to help, but you did help," Mariana stated firmly. "That's what matters." Hours later, Sarah was checking Evelyn's vital signs when she noticed a movement. The patient's eyes slowly opened, confused. Where am I?" Evelyn murmured, her voice hoarse. "You're at St. Luke's Hospital, ma'am," Sarah responded professionally. "You had a heart attack, but the surgery was successful." Evelyn blinked, trying to focus. There was something familiar about the nurse, but her mind was too foggy to place it. "Thank you," Evelyn whispered, surprising herself with the gratitude in her voice. Sarah nodded, fighting against the turmoil of emotions in her chest. "Rest now. I'll be around if you need anything." In the days that followed, Sarah cared for Evelyn with impeccable professionalism. Evelyn, for her part, proved to be a surprisingly docile patient, perhaps softened by the near-death experience. One night, as Sarah was adjusting the IV drip, Evelyn spoke unexpectedly. "You know, you remind me of someone." Sarah's heart raced, but she kept her composure. Really? Evelyn frowned, trying to remember. Yes, but I can't recall from where. Funny how the mind plays tricks, isn't it? Sarah offered a tense smile. Yes, funny. In the doctor's lounge, Sarah overheard a conversation between Dr. Ricardo and another doctor. Mrs. Ashworth is recovering well, Dr. Ricardo was saying. But I'm concerned about her history. She mentioned intense stress, workaholic tendencies, a typical case of someone who puts work above everything, even family. Sarah felt a pang of curiosity. Was there more to Evelyn's story than she had imagined? That night, when she got home, Sarah couldn't shake Evelyn from her thoughts. The woman who once symbolized cruelty now seemed so human, vulnerable. Sarah pulled out her old journal, rereading the entries from the days after that fateful encounter. The pain was still there, but now it was mixed with something new: compassion, curiosity. She knew the coming days would be challenging, but she also felt deep down that something important was about to happen. Something that could change not just her life, but Evelyn's too. With a deep sigh, Sarah closed the journal. Tomorrow would be another day, and she was ready to face it, whatever fate had in store. The dawn found Sarah already awake, her thoughts a whirlwind as she prepared for another shift at the hospital. The presence of Evelyn Ashworth as a patient had stirred emotions she thought she had long overcome. Entering Evelyn's room for the morning checkup, Sarah was greeted with a weak but genuine smile. "Good morning," Evelyn said, her voice still hoarse. "You know, I've been thinking, you've been so kind to me. I don't deserve such kindness." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. "It's my job, Mrs. Ashworth. Everyone deserves care." Evelyn shook her head. "No, it's more than that. You have a genuine compassion. It's rare these days." Sarah checked the vital signs in silence, fighting the urge to reveal the truth. Later that day, Sarah was changing Evelyn's IV when she heard raised voices in the hallway. The door abruptly swung open, revealing a middle-aged man, visibly upset. "Evelyn, for God's sake, you just got out of surgery and you're already trying to micromanage the company from your hospital bed?" Sarah recognized the man from the tabloids. It was Evelyn's husband. Evelyn sighed, exhausted. "Roberto, please. I'm just making sure everything runs smoothly in my absence." "And what about me? What about us?" Roberto retorted. "You almost died, Evelyn. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" Sarah felt uncomfortable, inadvertently witnessing such an intimate argument. She tried to discreetly leave, but Evelyn stopped her. "Sarah, could you stay, please? Your presence calms me." Roberto shot an irritated look at Sarah before leaving, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was heavy. Sarah adjusted Evelyn's pillows, noticing the tears in the older woman's eyes. "I'm sorry about that," Evelyn murmured. "My husband, he doesn't understand. Work is all I have." Sarah hesitated, then spoke softly. Maybe there's more to life than work?" Evelyn laughed bitterly. "Oh dear, if you only knew. There are things that can't be fixed, mistakes that can't be undone." In that moment, Sarah saw beyond the facade of the powerful executive. She saw a broken woman, carrying a burden she could barely imagine. During her break, Sarah retreated to the hospital chapel again. "I thought I'd find you here." Dr. Ricardo's voice surprised her. "You look troubled, Sarah. Is something wrong?" Sarah hesitated, then confided. "It's Mrs. Ashworth. I knew her before. She treated me terribly when I was on the streets, and now, taking care of her, seeing her vulnerable side." "I'm confused, Doctor." Dr. Ricardo nodded understandingly. "Life has its ironies, Sarah. Sometimes our greatest lessons come from our greatest challenges. But how can I help her when part of me still resents her?" "Maybe," Dr. Ricardo gently suggested, "helping her is exactly what you need to heal yourself." That night, Sarah was making notes in Evelyn's chart when she heard a murmur. Evelyn was asleep, but she seemed restless. "No. Please, my girl, forgive me." Sarah moved closer, intrigued. Evelyn continued to murmur, tears streaming down her sleeping face. I had no choice. I was too young. Forgive me." A sudden insight hit Sarah. Could there be more to Evelyn's story than she had imagined? The mention of a child, the weight of guilt in her words. Sarah felt a sudden compassion well up in her heart. Who was this woman really? What had turned her into the cold, cruel person Sarah had known years ago? In the days that followed, Sarah found herself watching Evelyn more closely. She noticed how her eyes filled with sadness when she saw families visiting other patients, how she clutched a small locket every time she thought no one was looking. One afternoon, while helping Evelyn with her physical therapy, Sarah gathered the courage. "Mrs. Ashworth, I hope I'm not being intrusive, but I heard you talking in your sleep. About a girl?" Evelyn froze, her face paling. I don't know what you're talking about." But her eyes told a different story. There was pain there, a deep, old pain. Sarah gently touched Evelyn's arm. Sometimes talking about our burdens can make them lighter. For a moment it seemed like Evelyn would open up. But then, as if she erected an invisible wall, she composed herself. "Thank you for your concern, Sarah. But there are things in my past that are better left there." That night at home, Sarah couldn't sleep. Her suspicions and Evelyn's reaction intrigued her. Determined, she opened her laptop and began searching for information about Evelyn Ashworth's past. Hours passed as Sarah delved into old articles and public records. And then she found it, a small note in a newspaper from 30 years ago, mentioning a teenager who had given her newborn daughter up for adoption. Sarah's heart raced. The dates matched, the age fit. It can't be. Sarah murmured to herself, a mix of shock and disbelief washing over her. The revelation hung before her, a truth so shocking she could barely process it. Sarah knew that this discovery would change everything. Her relationship with Evelyn, her understanding of the past, and perhaps her own future. With trembling hands, Sarah closed the laptop. What would she do with this information? Confront Evelyn? Keep it a secret? The implications were overwhelming. As the sun rose, Sarah made a decision. She needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it was. And tomorrow, she would face Evelyn Ashworth with that truth, prepared for whatever the outcome might be. Sarah arrived at the hospital earlier than usual, her mind still processing the discovery from the previous night. She needed answers but didn't know where to start. She decided to seek out Louisa, the social worker who had changed her life years ago. She found Louisa in the hospital cafe, having her breakfast before starting her day. "Louisa, I need your help," Sarah said, sitting down hastily. "It's about my adoption." Louisa frowned, surprised by the topic. "Sarah, you know I don't have access to those records." "What happened?" Sarah hesitated, then poured everything out. Her suspicions about Evelyn, the research she did, the fear and confusion she felt. Louisa listened intently, her face a mix of concern and compassion. "Oh, Sarah, this is complicated. But if you really want to know the truth, I can try to reach out to some old contacts. I can't promise anything, but I'll do my best." While waiting for news from Louisa, Sarah went about her daily tasks. When she entered Evelyn's room for the morning checkup, she found the older woman staring out the window, lost in thought. "Good morning, Mrs. Ashworth," Sarah said softly. Evelyn turned, a sad smile on her lips. "Sarah, dear, you know, I've been thinking. You remind me so much of someone I lost a long time ago." Sarah's heart raced. "Who?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Evelyn hesitated, then shook her head. "It doesn't matter. It's all in the past." Sarah wanted to press further, but at that moment her pager went off. Louisa was calling her. Sarah found Louisa in the social work office, her face serious. "I managed to find some information," Louisa said, handing Sarah a thin folder. "It's not much, but, well, I think it confirms your suspicions." With trembling hands, Sarah opened the folder. There it was. An old birth certificate, the mother's name clearly visible. Evelyn Silva, who later changed her last name to Ashworth. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, feeling dizzy. It's true, she's my mother." Louisa placed a comforting hand on Sarah's shoulder. "What are you going to do now?" Sarah closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "I have to tell her. I need to know why." Sarah spent the next few hours in a whirlwind of emotions, going through her tasks mechanically while her mind spun. How could she approach Evelyn? How could she reveal such a monumental truth? It was Dr. Ricardo who noticed her agitated state during rounds. "Sarah, are you okay? You seem distracted." Sarah hesitated, then decided to confide in the mentor who had supported her so much. "Dr. Ricardo, I discovered something that could change everything. About Mrs. Ashworth. About me." She told him about her discovery, watching the surprise and then the understanding spread across the doctor's face. "Sarah," he said gently, "this is an incredible revelation. But remember, no matter what happens, you are the person you've become because of your own choices and efforts. This doesn't change who you are." Dr. Ricardo's words calmed Sarah, giving her the courage she needed. The sun was already setting when Sarah finally gathered the courage to confront Evelyn. She entered the room, finding the older woman distractedly watching TV. "Mrs. Ashworth," Sarah began, her voice trembling slightly, "there's something I need to tell you." Evelyn turned off the TV, focusing her attention on Sarah. "What is it, dear? You seem upset." Sarah took a deep breath. I discovered something about the two of us." She pulled the birth certificate out of the folder, handing it to Evelyn with trembling hands. Evelyn took the paper, her eyes widening as she read it. Her face paled and she looked at Sarah with a mix of shock and recognition. "It can't be," Evelyn whispered. Your daughter," Sarah finished, tears in her eyes. "The daughter you gave up for adoption 30 years ago." The silence that followed was deafening. Evelyn stared at Sarah as if seeing her for the first time. "I always knew," Evelyn finally spoke, her voice choked with emotion. "From the first day I saw you here, there was something about you. But I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe it." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, her heart pounding. "Why? Why did you abandon me?" Evelyn closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "I was so young, Sarah. Just a scared teenager. My parents, they forced me to give you up. They said it was best for everyone." "And then?" Sarah pressed. "You never thought about looking for me?" "Every day," Evelyn whispered. "But the longer time went on, the harder it got. I built this life, this persona. I was afraid the truth would destroy everything." The next few hours were an emotional roller coaster. Mother and daughter, separated by decades of secrets and circumstances, finally opened up to each other. Sarah spoke about her difficult childhood, the years on the streets, the struggle to rebuild her life. Evelyn listened, horrified and regretful, realizing the consequences of her past decision. Evelyn, in turn, revealed the pain she had carried for all those years, how the emptiness in her heart led her to bury herself in work, building walls around her. As the sun began to rise, lighting up the hospital room, Sarah and Evelyn were exhausted, but with a new understanding of each other. "I know I can't erase the past," Evelyn said softly. "But if you want, if you can give me a chance, I'd like to try to be part of your life now." Sarah looked at the woman who had once hurt her so deeply, but who she now saw in a new light. "It will take time," she replied honestly. "But yes, I'd like to try." The two women looked at each other, a small smile forming on their faces. It was the beginning of a new journey, full of challenges but also with the possibilities of healing and redemption. The day dawned with a different atmosphere at St. Luke's Hospital. Sarah arrived for her shift, the weight of last night's revelation still fresh in her mind. She hesitated for a moment before entering Evelyn's room, unsure of how to proceed after their intense conversation. As she opened the door, Sarah found Evelyn awake, staring out the window with a pensive expression. "Good morning," Sarah said softly, breaking the silence. Evelyn turned, her eyes meeting Sarah's. For a moment, Neither spoke, the air heavy with the enormity of what they had discovered. "Sarah," Evelyn finally said, her voice trembling. I spent the whole night thinking. There's so much I need to tell you, so much to explain." Sarah nodded, sitting down in the chair beside the bed. "I have a lot of questions too." As Sarah checked Evelyn's vitals, they began to talk, hesitant at first, but gradually opening up to each other. Evelyn spoke of her youth, the pressure from her conservative family, the fear and shame she felt when she discovered she was pregnant at 16. "I wanted to keep you," Evelyn confessed, tears in her eyes. "But my parents, they said it would ruin my future, that it was better for everyone if I gave you up for adoption." Sarah listened, her heart torn between compassion for the scared young woman Evelyn had been and the pain of the difficult life she herself had faced. Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Ricardo's arrival for the morning rounds. He paused, sensing the tension in the air. "Is everything okay here?" he asked, looking from Sarah to Evelyn. Sarah hesitated, then decided that the truth was the best way forward. "Dr. Ricardo, we discovered something last night. Mrs. Ashworth she's my biological mother." The doctor was momentarily speechless, processing the information. Then, with a gentle smile, he said, "Well, that explains a lot. You two are more alike than you realize." His observation broke the tension, and both Sarah and Evelyn let out a nervous laugh. After Dr. Ricardo left, Evelyn took Sarah's hand. "I know I can't change the past," she said, "but I want you to know that there hasn't been a day when I didn't think of you, wondering how you were, if you were happy." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. "It was hard," she admitted. "There were times when I thought it wasn't worth going on." Evelyn sobbed, the guilt evident on her face. "Oh, Sarah, I'm so sorry. If I could go back, but we can't," Sarah interrupted gently. "What matters is what we do from here on." The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of emotions. Sarah alternated between her duties at the hospital and deep conversations with Evelyn. They shared stories, laughed, cried, and slowly began to build a bridge over the chasm that separated them. During a break, Sarah found Mariana in the cafeteria. "You won't believe what happened," Sarah said, sharing the revelation with her friend. Mariana listened, wide-eyed. "My God, Sarah, wow, how are you dealing with all this?" Sarah sighed. "Honestly, I don't know. It's like my world has been turned upside down." In the afternoon, Evelyn's husband, Roberto, arrived for a visit. He was shocked to find his wife chatting animatedly with Sarah. "What's going on here?" he asked, confused. Evelyn looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "Roberto?" Evelyn began, her voice trembling slightly. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I've hidden for many years." As Evelyn revealed the truth, Roberto's face went through a series of emotions: shock, confusion, and finally understanding. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked, hurt. "I was afraid," Evelyn admitted. "Afraid of losing everything I had built." A week after Evelyn's discharge, Sarah found herself standing before the imposing gates of the Ashworth mansion. Her heart raced as she rang the doorbell. The idea of having lunch with Evelyn and Roberto still felt surreal. The door opened, revealing Evelyn, who smiled nervously. "Sarah, it's so good to see you." Sarah stepped inside, taking in the luxurious interior of the house. "It's a beautiful home," she commented, feeling out of place. "Thank you," Evelyn replied, leading her to the dining room. "But lately I've been thinking that it might be too large for just the two of us." Roberto was waiting for them, greeting Sarah with a warm handshake. "Welcome to our home, Sarah." The lunch began in an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the clinking of cutlery. Finally, Roberto cleared his throat. "So, Sarah, Evelyn told me about your work at the hospital. It must be rewarding." Sarah nodded, grateful for the attempt to start a conversation. "It is. Every day is a challenge, but being able to help people, it's worth it." Evelyn looked at her with a mixture of pride and regret. "You've built an incredible life, Sarah. Despite, well, despite everything. The comment hung in the air, laden with meaning. After lunch, Evelyn invited Sarah to take a walk in the garden. They walked side by side, the silence heavy between them. "Sarah," Evelyn began, her voice trembling, "I know that saying sorry isn't enough, but I want you to know that I deeply regret abandoning you." Sarah stopped, turning to face Evelyn. "Why didn't you ever reach out to me, after you became an adult, settled?" Evelyn looked away, shame evident on her face. Fear, cowardice. The longer time passed, the harder it became to face what I had done. Back inside the house, Roberto suggested showing Sarah some old photos. Evelyn hesitated but agreed. Sitting on the sofa, they flipped through albums that chronicled Evelyn's life after giving Sarah up for adoption. Graduation, marriage, professional successes. Sarah watched in silence, a whirlwind of emotions in her chest. Anger at the comfortable life Evelyn had while she struggled on the streets. Sadness for the moments they never shared. And, surprisingly, a twinge of compassion seeing the loneliness in Evelyn's eyes in many of the photos. "You look sad in many of these pictures," Sarah remarked gently. Evelyn nodded, tears in her eyes. "I was. I always felt like something was missing." As the afternoon went on, the conversation flowed more easily. Sarah shared stories of her childhood in foster homes, her years on the streets, and how she found Luisa and the rehabilitation program. Evelyn and Roberto listened, horrified by the hardships Sarah faced, but also impressed by her resilience. "You are an incredible woman, Sarah," Roberto said, admiration in his voice. "You've overcome so much." Sarah smiled shyly. "I've had help. People who believed in me when I didn't." Evelyn took Sarah's hand. "I wish I had been one of those people, but maybe it's not too late to start." As the sun set, Sarah prepared to leave. At the door, Evelyn hugged her impulsively. Sarah tensed for a moment, but then relaxed into the embrace. "Thank you for coming today," Evelyn whispered. "I know it wasn't easy." Sarah pulled away, looking into Evelyn's eyes. "No, it wasn't, but I'm glad I came." Roberto joined them. "Sarah, we want you to know that you will always be welcome here. This is your home too if you want." Sarah nodded, emotional. "Thank you. That means a lot." That night in her small apartment, Sarah reflected on the day. She picked up her journal and began to write. Today was a day of first steps, of fragile bridges being built over deep chasms. There is still so much pain, so much hurt. But there are possibilities too. Evelyn isn't the villain I imagined for so long. She is human, flawed, regretful, and maybe, just maybe, worthy of a second chance. I don't know what the future holds for us if we can truly build a mother-daughter relationship after so much time. But today, for the first time, I feel like it's possible. Forgiveness is a journey, not a destination. And today, I took the first step on that journey. Sarah closed the journal, feeling a mix of exhaustion and hope. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but she was ready to face it. One day at a time, one conversation at a time, she and Evelyn would try to rebuild what had been broken so long ago. With this thought, Sarah fell asleep, dreaming of possibilities and second chances. 6 months had passed since Sarah and Evelyn's reunion. Autumn had arrived in São Paulo, painting the trees in golden and red hues. Sarah was walking through Ibirapuera Park, lost in thought, when she heard a familiar voice calling her name. "Sarah, what a coincidence to run into you here." It was Evelyn, dressed in workout clothes, clearly in the middle of a morning run. Sarah smiled, noting how her biological mother looked healthier and more relaxed than ever. "Hi, Evelyn. I didn't know you ran." Evelyn laughed. "I started recently. The doctor said it's good for the heart, you know, not just the physical but the emotional one as well." The two began to walk together, a comfortable silence between them. "How are things at the hospital?" Evelyn asked, genuinely interested. Sarah smiled. "They're going well. Actually, I've been promoted to head nurse in the emergency department." Evelyn stopped, turning to Sarah with a proud smile. "Sarah, that's wonderful. Congratulations." For a moment, both were silent, the realization of how far they had come in their relationship hanging between them. "You know," Sarah began hesitantly, "a few years ago, I never would have imagined being here talking to you like this." Evelyn nodded, her eyes misty. "I know. Sometimes it still feels like a dream." The two sat on a nearby bench, watching people pass by. "Sarah," Evelyn said softly, "there's something I want to tell you. Roberto and we've decided to donate a significant portion of our fortune to programs supporting homeless youth." Sarah looked at Evelyn, surprised. "Really? That's amazing." Evelyn smiled sadly. "It's the least we can do. Seeing your journey made us realize how much privilege we've had and how we can use that to make a difference." Sarah felt a wave of emotion. "That will help so many people, Evelyn. People like I was once." That afternoon, Sarah met Mariana at a cafe near the hospital. The two friends hadn't seen each other in a few weeks due to their busy schedules. "So how are things with your mom?" Mariana asked, curious. Sarah sighed, a small smile on her lips. "Strange as it may sound, they're getting better. There are still tough moments, of course, but we're making progress." Mariana smiled, squeezing Sarah's hand. "I'm so happy for you, Sarah. You deserve this chance for healing." "You know," Sarah reflected, "I think I've finally understood that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending nothing happened. It's about choosing to move forward despite the pain." Later that day, Sarah received a message from Evelyn inviting her to a family dinner over the weekend. Hesitant, she accepted. On Saturday night, Sarah found herself once again at the Ashworth mansion. This time, however, she felt less out of place. Roberto opened the door, greeting her warmly. "Sarah, it's great to see you. Come in, come in." In the dining room, Sarah was surprised to see not just Evelyn and Roberto, but also Luisa and Dr. Ricardo. "We hope you don't mind," Evelyn said, noticing Sarah's surprise. "We wanted to bring together the people who have been important in your journey." The dinner was filled with laughter and shared stories. Sarah watched, amazed at how people from different parts of her life mixed so naturally. In a quiet moment, Evelyn raised her glass. "I'd like to make a toast," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "To Sarah, the daughter I thought I had lost forever. Your strength, resilience, and ability to forgive inspire me every day to be a better person." Everyone raised their glasses, and Sarah felt tears in her eyes. "And to all of you," Sarah added, "who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Thank you for being my chosen family." After dinner, Sarah and Evelyn went out to the balcony, watching the stars. "Sarah?" Evelyn began hesitantly. "I know we still have a long way to go, but I want you to know how grateful I am for this second chance." Sarah looked at Evelyn, seeing no longer the cold woman who had rejected her years ago, but a regretful mother trying to make amends. "I'm grateful too, Evelyn," Sarah responded softly. "For a long time I thought my story was just about loss and abandonment, but now I see it's about redemption and second chances." The two women hugged, years of pain and regret finally beginning to dissipate. Later that night, back in her apartment, Sarah picked up her journal. She hesitated for a moment before beginning to write. "Today, I realized that my journey hasn't ended. In fact, a new chapter is just beginning. A chapter of healing, forgiveness, and love. I don't know what the future holds for me and Evelyn, or for any of us. But I know that for the first time in a long time, I'm looking forward to finding out. The abandoned girl I once was has finally found her place in the world. And that place is here, in this moment, surrounded by people who love me, including the mother I thought I had lost forever. Life is made of second chances, and I, Sarah Oliveira, am embracing mine with all my heart." Sarah closed the journal, a serene smile on her face. Outside, the sun was beginning to rise, promising a new day and a future full of possibilities. If you enjoyed this story and want to keep up with more exciting and inspiring content, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Click the card that appears on the screen so you don't miss any updates. Your support makes all the difference and helps us bring more stories like this. Thank you for watching.